The Lake Bodom murders are one of the most infamous unsolved homicide cases in the history of Finland. Lake Bodom is located in the town of Espoo, near the southern tip of the country. On June 4, 1960, a group of 4 teenagers rode around the edge of the lake on their motorcycles, heading toward a small patch of woods where they planned to set up a tent and spend the weekend camping. Driving the motorcycles were Nils Gustafsson and Seppo Boisman, 2 18-year-old boys who had been best friends for years. Both of them had their girlfriends hanging onto them on the back of their mopeds, making for a total of 4 of them. Riding behind Seppo was 15-year-old Tuulikki Maki, who had introduced her own best friend Irmeli Jorglund to Nils just a few weeks after she started dating Seppo. And now, just a few weeks after the 2 couples had become official, they were off to welcome the summer with a couple's camping trip. As they stopped in town to pick up some beer and food, the teenagers got a few suspicious looks from the locals, who thought it was strange to plan a camping trip near Lake Bodom, which was mostly used for fishing and swimming, but not so much for camping. Regardless, the teenagers soon reached the campsite, and after pitching their tent, they enjoyed a carefree evening of drinking, swimming, and fishing. A little after 2 a.m., the boys crawled back into a single tent with the girls and went to sleep. The following morning, the joy of the teenage dream from the previous night had been replaced by a scene straight out of a horror movie. The tent had collapsed on itself, and the bloody bodies of the 4 teenagers appeared to be wrapped up inside the tent, with 3 of them losing their lives to several stab wounds and blunt force trauma to the head. The only survivor was Nils Gustafsson, who had been seriously injured but somehow managed to stay alive enough time to be rescued. At around 6 a.m., a group of birdwatchers spotted the collapsed tent and caught a glimpse of a blonde man walking away from the scene. Chalking it up to a wild party the previous night, they thought nothing of it and failed to call the police. At around 11 a.m. though, a man named Esko Johansson went down to the lake to swim with his young son when he spotted the collapsed tent in a clearing. When he went over to investigate, he found the 4 teens wrapped up in the shredded tent. By the looks of it, someone on the outside had cut the guy ropes, sliced through the tent, and viciously attacked the kids in their sleeps with a knife and possibly some type of bludgeon. Interestingly, all the kids' wallets, moped keys, and even some of their clothes had been taken by the attacker. As he took in the gruesome scene, Esko suddenly saw Nils take a sharp breath and move ever so slightly. As soon as he realized the boy was alive, Esko sped back into town with his son to alert the police. Upon arriving at the campsite, the cops immediately took Nils back to the hospital to recover. Although he had suffered from serious brain injuries, Nils recalled the face of a blonde man dressed in black and red staring down at him through a hole in the tent before the attack. From his description, police were able to make a sketch of the suspect, which has since become infamous for its disturbing nature and the man's cold, lifeless stare. Other fishermen and bystanders also reported seeing the mysterious blonde man walking in the woods in the early hours of the morning of June 5th, but the only details police really knew about him were that he was probably in his 20s and around 5'8". You would normally hope that a police investigation would help shed more light on cases like this, but that's not really the way things happened in the Lake Bodom murders. As soon as the Finnish police began investigating, they made a series of rookie mistakes that made it even more difficult to solve an already confusing case, starting with the fact that they failed to put police tape around the crime scene, leading to the tampering of potential key evidence. The only relevant clues they managed to gather were Nils Gustafsson's shoes that were less than a mile away from the murder scene. Shockingly, after setting up dozens of road checkpoints in the woods, the cops ended up arresting a total of 88 criminals on Finland's most wanted list, but none of them was the Lake Bodom murderer. As the investigation progressed, the cops narrowed down the list of suspects to 2. The main suspect was a man named Valle Jolstrom. Jolstrom had a history of violence towards campers, and it wasn't unusual for him to throw rocks at people who tried to set up their tents in the woods, and even put razor blades in their apples for them to swallow. Even though he confessed to the murders to his neighbor while he was drunk, his wife provided a dodgy alibi for him, which the cops ended up believing for some reason. Some sources claimed that on her deathbed, Jolstrom's wife took back her statement and confessed that she lied about the alibi, but this was never officially confirmed. Still, even if Valle Jolstrom was guilty, it would have been impossible to prove, as he took his own life in 1969 by drowning himself in a lake. The second main suspect in the case was Hans Asman, a German immigrant who had moved to Finland in the early 1950s and was 36 when the murders took place. According to police records, Asman had gone to a nearby surgical hospital the day after the crime with dirt under his fingernails and red stains on his clothes. Although he was allegedly a camp guard at a German concentration camp and was later linked to the murders of other teenagers in Finland, Hans had a rock-solid alibi for the evening of June 5th and was never arrested. With the two men cleared, the police only really had one lead left. During the victim's funeral, a photograph of the crowd was taken and the cops found something pretty disturbing. The image in question shows a mysterious man bearing a striking resemblance to the official composite sketch of the killer. However, after searching nearby areas for months, police were unable to find the man, and his identity remains a mystery to this day. In the absence of any more solid leads, the case went cold until 2004 when the Finnish police re-examined the evidence with more modern forensic techniques. Exactly 44 years after the murders, in a strange turn of events, they charged the lone survivor, then 62-year-old Nils Gustafsson, with the gruesome crimes committed at Lake Bodom. Up until he was accused, Nils had been living a quiet life as a bus driver and a married father of two, and the evidence used to build the case against him was flimsy to say the least. The prosecution alleged that he had murdered his girlfriend and two friends out of jealousy, an accusation that the victim's family supported throughout the trial. In the end, though, it was ruled that, given the severity of his injuries, it would have been impossible for Nils to murder his friends and then drop his shoes off about a mile from the campsite. In 2005, Nils was acquitted of all charges and was awarded the equivalent of $60,000 for damages caused to his image by the media. The identity of the murderer is still a mystery, and to this day, the spot where the three teens were brutally murdered is still used as a camping ground. On January 14, 1989, a Chicago-based television station called WMAQ did its usual nightly sign-off with footage of the raising of the flag and the Star-Spangled Banner playing in the background. As soon as the national anthem finished playing, the screen cut to a mysterious missing person poster featuring a woman named Joanna Lopez. Disturbingly, the image was accompanied by complete silence. For some reason, the poster was aired all night by WMAQ until it was interrupted by the morning news. Back then, it wasn't very common for news stations to simply broadcast images of missing persons, but when they did, they followed a very specific structure and format to give viewers as much information as possible for them to have a fighting chance of finding the victims. Details like their age, height, gender, race, last known location, and hair color were always listed next to the image of the victim, which was always of the highest quality possible. In Joanna Lopez's case, however, none of those crucial details were included, and all we can really gather from the poster with the extremely grainy and eerie image is her name. 2 years later, in 1991, the same poster was shown on WMAQ, but this time there were a few key differences. Although the name and phone number were the same as in 1989, the image appeared to have been cleaned up, which made it easier to see Joanna was wearing sunglasses. Strangely, in the 1991 broadcast, the image was only shown for about 10 seconds before cutting to a screen filled with colored bars. I was able to find that the number listed below the poster corresponded to the Youth Division office of the Chicago Police Department. After digging even deeper, I found that many of the missing person announcements made by the Chicago Police Department back then were pretty similar in appearance, with a diagonal banner intersecting the image, as well as a phone number and last known location below the picture. However, again, for some reason in Joanna Lopez's poster, you can only see a phone number, making it even more difficult to locate her. What's most disturbing about the incident is that Joanna Lopez can't be found on any databases for missing people or any other kind of national directory. Her name doesn't come up anywhere, no matter how far you look back. The lack of information on the alleged victim has led many people to believe that Joanna is either dead, she never went missing, or that she never even existed at all. One theory that has gained massive traction on Reddit is that Joanna's face could have been artificially constructed or somehow digitally modified as part of a prank played by someone at the studio, or by a hacker who somehow managed to get into WMAQ's system. With about 8,500 people going missing each year in Chicago between 1989 and 1991, it's also possible that Joanna Lopez was simply another victim of the widespread violence in Chicago in the early 90s. And that the Youth Division used the terrible quality image as a last resort to see if they could get someone to recognize her. Despite the traction that the case gained online, there wasn't a lot of new or relevant information surfacing on Joanna Lopez. In 2022, however, a couple Reddit users claimed to have contacted the WMAQ station. When they asked about the mysterious broadcast, they were told that the records showed that the information had been submitted anonymously by a source who claimed they would call back later and never did. Other requests for information to the FBI and the Chicago PD came back with no matches, making it possible that Joanna Lopez never really existed. To this day, the Joanna Lopez subreddit remains active with all kinds of updates, but so far nothing conclusive has surfaced. The mysterious nature of the case leaves all kinds of questions unanswered. Could her name have been an alias? Did she ever even exist? If so, what really happened to Joanna Lopez? We'll likely never know. On May 3, 2007, 3-year-old Madeline McCann was on vacation with her parents Kate and Jerry and her 2 younger siblings at the Ocean Club in Praia da Luz, Portugal. In the evening, her parents went to dinner with a group of friends at a restaurant in the complex about 100 yards from the holiday apartment they were staying in. Because of their young age, Madeline and her 2 younger siblings stayed back in the apartment. Before leaving for dinner at around 8:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry left the door to the apartment slightly open. Throughout the night, the McCanns and their friends took turns checking on each other's children, and when Jerry went to check on Madeline and her siblings at around 9 p.m., he noticed the door was in a slightly different position than he left it half an hour earlier. 15 minutes later, Jane Tanner, one of the other parents in the group, went to check on her kids and noticed something suspicious. As she walked past the McCann's apartment, she saw a man with long hair, bushy eyebrows, and a mustache carrying a child and walking down the hallway. She didn't think much of it at the time, which she later came to regret. At around 10 p.m., just 45 minutes after Jane came back to the table, Kate McCann went back to the apartment and noticed the door was now completely open. Fearing the worst, she stepped into the room, and that's when she started living every parent's worst nightmare. Madeline was missing, the windows were open, and the shutters were up. In a panic, Kate went back to alert her husband, her friends, and the staff at the club complex. Unfortunately, nobody could find Madeline, and the next morning, an official police investigation was launched. For an entire year, the situation went from bad to worse for the McCanns, as Kate and Jerry were later formally labeled as prime suspects in the disappearance of their daughter and blamed for the entire incident in a Portuguese newspaper. However, the accusations were later dropped as Jane Tanner made her statement about the suspicious man she had seen carrying a little girl close to the McCann's apartment around the time of the disappearance. Jane's description of the man matched the statement given by Gail Cooper, another tourist who had reported seeing a similar suspicious man walking around the complex in the days leading up to the disappearance. When asked about the man, Gail said, "He made my blood run cold and gave me the creeps. He seemed really strange. He said he was collecting money for an orphanage in nearby Espiage that was caring for 3 children whose parents had recently been killed in an accident on the Main Coast Road. The man was rambling and becoming agitated. I thought he was a con man trying to pull a fast one." It was later confirmed that the orphanage he mentioned does not exist, and there was no evidence of the fatal car crash he mentioned. The description of the suspicious man was later confirmed by another 12-year-old girl who had seen him multiple times in the days leading up to May 3rd, and based on the testimony of these 3 different people, police released this official disturbing sketch. For the next 4.5 years, the man in the sketch became the prime suspect in Madeline's disappearance, but the international manhunt that ensued resulted in nothing but a series of false anonymous tips and cold leads. In 2012, it was revealed that the man Jane Tanner had seen had simply been an innocent dad carrying his daughter down the hallway, and he was in no way connected to the suspicious con man who had tried to collect money from Gail Cooper. In 2013, a new digital render of another man who was allegedly seen walking near the club complex in 2007 was released, and he didn't look anything like the previous suspect. Although the case continued to receive funding, the investigation went cold for the next several years, during which Kate and Jerry McCann continued to suffer and miss their daughter. In 2019, an 8-part Netflix series was released about Madeline's disappearance, and less than a year after that, police announced they now believe the man responsible for the crime was a man named Christian Bruckner. Christian Bruckner owned a suspicious Volkswagen camper van that was found near the club complex where Madeline disappeared. After being seen driving the van in the area on the night of May 3rd, Christian allegedly confessed his involvement in the crime to a man at a bar. Shortly after the disappearance, Christian and the other man were sitting in a German bar when a news report about Madeline's disappearance came on TV. That's when Christian allegedly said something to suggest he was responsible for her disappearance. Even though he later denied his involvement in the disappearance to the authorities, police are still investigating him to this day, and it's possible they'll soon make a break in the case. Hopefully they'll find the man responsible and bring him to justice to at least bring some sense of closure to Madeline's family after a traumatic 16 years. On May 31, 2001, 22-year-old Charlotte Murray Pace had just graduated from Louisiana State University and was looking forward to moving to Atlanta to start a new life. Sadly, she was never able to launch her new career, for that very same day, a man broke into her home and stabbed her with a screwdriver 81 times, taking her life. In the years leading up to Charlotte's murder, Baton Rouge, Louisiana had become a hotspot for similar crimes, with several women losing their lives to a single violent criminal with a very similar pattern of attacks. According to police reports, the perpetrator would often watch these women for weeks or even months, becoming familiar with their routines and habits, looking for the perfect moment to strike. In many cases, he pretended to be a kind stranger asking for help. When the victims obliged, he would turn violent and do the same things he did to Charlotte. After Charlotte Pace's murder, a woman named Diane Alexander reported to the cops that an African-American man had attempted to strangle her in her home on July 9, 2002. According to her statement, the suspect came to her home asking to use the phone, and when she opened the door, he brutally attacked her. Thankfully, the woman's son came home and scared the perpetrator off before he could take her life. Based on the description that Diane and her son provided, the cops were able to have a better understanding of the perpetrator's physical appearance. But after the cops extracted physical evidence from several of the crime scenes, the FBI reported that the killer was actually a white male between the ages of 25 and 35. Based on the evidence and several witnesses' descriptions, police came up with this horrifying sketch. However, the suspect being identified as a white man ended up being a mistake by the FBI, one that gave the killer enough time to take the lives of 2 other women while the authorities were searching for someone who didn't even look anything like him. It wasn't until forensic evidence from 2 more crime scenes was analyzed that a Florida lab confirmed to the police that the killer was an African-American man, not a white man. While these killings were taking place in Baton Rouge, there were more guns sold in Louisiana to terrified women who wanted to arm themselves than ever before. Fortunately, it didn't take long for the authorities to collect a DNA sample from their prime suspect, a man named Derek Todd Lee, who had been previously arrested in the years of the murders for domestic abuse and stalking. He had also been investigated for murder, but the cops couldn't legally arrest him because of a technicality. When his DNA was tested against forensic evidence at the crime scenes, it was a match for 5 of the victims of the brutal murders in Baton Rouge. When police went to Lee's home to arrest him for the murders, he was long gone. Fortunately, it didn't take long for authorities to find him in Atlanta and arrest him near a college on May 27, 2003. In October 2004, Derek Todd Lee was found guilty and sentenced to death for the murders of 2 women. Later, his involvement in the murders of 6 others was also confirmed. Derek Todd Lee never reached his execution day, as he died of heart disease in 2016 at the age of 47. Often referred to as the Ghost of Baton Rouge or the Baton Rouge serial killer, Derek Todd Lee is remembered as one of America's most evil serial killers to this day, and as a man who was given one of the most disturbing police sketches in history.